My sister called me hysterical. Mom's cancer treatment costs $30,000. Insurance won't cover it. I emptied my savings account. 3 days later, I saw Mom at the mall buying designer handbags. There was never any cancer. I called Adult Protective Services, reported elder abuse, and had Mom's finances investigated. They found $50,000 in hidden accounts. I, 32M, thought I knew my family. I thought I understood the boundaries of what people would do for money. I was wrong on both counts, and it cost me everything I'd saved over the past decade. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk. My sister's voice cracked through the phone, barely coherent between sobs. She told me Mom had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The treatment would cost $30,000, and insurance was refusing to cover the experimental therapy that could save her life. She said Mom was too proud to ask me directly, but they were desperate. I didn't hesitate. Not for a second. The next morning, I walked into my bank and withdrew $28,000 from my savings account. It represented 5 years of careful budgeting, skipped vacations, and overtime shifts at the engineering firm where I worked. I'd been saving for a house down payment, but what good is a house when your mother is dying? My sister met me at Mom's apartment that afternoon. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her trembling. She whispered that I was saving Mom's life, that she'd never forget what I was doing. Mom looked frail when she came to the door, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed to confirm everything my sister had told me. Mom tried to refuse the money at first, saying she couldn't accept such a sacrifice from her son. But I pressed the envelope into her hands and told her that family takes care of family. She started crying and said I was the best son a mother could ask for. The guilt in her eyes seemed so genuine, so raw, that I felt terrible for even having a moment's hesitation about the money. I left that day feeling like I'd done something meaningful. Sure, I'd be starting over financially, but I'd potentially saved my mother's life. That night, I called my girlfriend and told her we'd need to postpone our plans to move in together. She was understanding, supportive even, saying she was proud of me for taking care of my family. 3 days later, I was at the mall picking up a birthday gift for a coworker when I saw her. Mom was standing outside the Louis Vuitton store, examining a handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked healthy, vibrant even, nothing like the frail woman I'd seen just days before. She was laughing with the sales associate, clearly enjoying herself as she pointed to different bags displayed in the window. I stood frozen in the middle of the corridor, watching her select not one, but 3 expensive handbags. She paid with cash, counting out bills from a thick stack she pulled from her purse. The same purse I'd seen her carry for years, now apparently insufficient for someone who could afford designer accessories. My hands started shaking. I followed her at a distance as she moved to other high-end stores. She bought shoes, jewelry, and clothes, each purchase made with the same casual confidence of someone who had money to burn. This wasn't the behavior of someone facing a life-threatening illness and financial ruin. I confronted her in the parking lot. She saw me approaching and her face went white. I asked her about the cancer, about the treatment, about why she was shopping instead of fighting for her life. She stammered that she was having a good day, that the doctors said light activity was beneficial, that she'd found some of the money elsewhere and wanted to treat herself before starting chemotherapy. But her explanations felt hollow, rehearsed. When I asked which oncologist she was seeing, she gave me a name I'd never heard before. When I asked about the treatment facility, she became vague and defensive. She told me I was being paranoid and hurtful, that she was already dealing with enough stress without her own son interrogating her. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was fundamentally wrong, and I needed to know what. I started with the basics, calling the oncologist's office my mother had mentioned. No such doctor existed at that practice. I tried 3 other cancer centers in the area. None of them had any record of my mother as a patient. The next morning, I drove to Mom's apartment unannounced. She wasn't home, but her neighbor mentioned seeing her leave early with several shopping bags. I waited in my car until she returned, watching her struggle to carry multiple designer store bags up to her apartment. This wasn't the behavior of someone undergoing cancer treatment. I called my sister and asked her directly about Mom's diagnosis. She became defensive immediately, asking why I was questioning everything and whether I didn't trust her. She said Mom had sworn her to secrecy about some of the details because she didn't want to worry me. When I pressed for specifics about the treatment plan, She said she'd have to check with Mom and get back to me. She never called back. Over the next week, I did my own investigation. I called every oncology practice within 50 miles. None had any record of my mother. I checked with her primary care physician, who confirmed she'd had routine blood work done recently and everything was normal. No cancer markers, no concerning results, no referrals to specialists. I felt sick, not just disappointed or angry, but physically nauseated by what I was discovering. My own mother and sister had orchestrated an elaborate lie to steal my life savings. They'd exploited my love for family, my fear of losing Mom, and my natural instinct to help those I cared about. But I needed more proof before I acted. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. Within a week, he'd uncovered a pattern of deception that went far deeper than I'd imagined. Mom had been running similar scams for years. She'd borrowed money from extended family members, church friends, and former co-workers, always with elaborate stories about medical emergencies, home repairs, or financial crises. She'd never paid any of them back. The investigator found evidence of at least 12 different people who'd been victimized over the past 5 years. More disturbing was what he discovered about her finances. Despite claiming poverty and desperation, Mom had multiple bank accounts containing over $50,000. She'd been systematically hiding money while crying poverty to anyone who would listen. The designer shopping spree I'd witnessed wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a regular pattern of expensive purchases funded by other people's generosity. My sister wasn't just an accomplice, she was an active participant. The investigator found text messages between them discussing which family members to target next, how to make the cancer story more believable, and how to split the money they collected. They'd been planning to hit up our uncle next, with a story about needing money for radiation treatments. I realized I'd been played by experts. The tears, the guilt, the apparent reluctance to accept help, it had all been carefully orchestrated theater designed to maximize my emotional response and minimize my logical thinking. They'd studied my personality, my values, and my financial situation, then crafted the perfect lie to separate me from my money. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. I'd grown up believing family was sacred, that blood relationships meant something special. I trusted these people with my most vulnerable emotions, my deepest fears about losing someone I loved. They'd weaponized that trust against me. I spent 2 days deciding how to respond. Part of me wanted to confront them directly, to demand my money back and cut them out of my life forever. But I realized that approach would likely result in denial, manipulation, and probably another round of lies designed to make me feel guilty for not trusting them. Instead, I decided to pursue justice through official channels. If they were going to treat me like a mark in a con game, I'd treat them like the criminals they were. I called Adult Protective Services and reported suspected elder abuse. I explained that my mother appeared to be the victim of financial exploitation, possibly by someone with access to her accounts and personal information. I provided them with the investigator's findings about the hidden money and the pattern of fraudulent requests for financial assistance. The APS investigator was thorough and professional. She explained that financial exploitation of elderly individuals was a serious crime, regardless of who was perpetrating it. She said they'd conduct a full investigation of Mom's finances and living situation to determine if she was being victimized or if she was victimizing others. I also filed a police report for fraud. The detective assigned to the case was initially skeptical, asking why I'd given money without verifying the medical claims first. But when I showed him the evidence my private investigator had gathered, his attitude changed completely. He said this was clearly a pattern of criminal behavior that needed to be prosecuted. The investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, authorities had frozen Mom's bank accounts and begun interviewing her previous victims. The pattern of fraud was so extensive and well-documented that charges were filed against both Mom and my sister for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft by deception. Mom called me the day after she was arrested. She was crying, begging me to drop the charges and work things out as a family. She said she'd pay back every penny and that involving the police was destroying the family. She claimed she'd only taken the money because she was desperate and didn't know where else to turn. I told her that if she'd been truly desperate, she wouldn't have spent my money on designer handbags. I explained that her tears and apologies meant nothing now because I'd learned they were just another manipulation tactic. I said that real families don't lie to each other about cancer to steal money. My sister tried a different approach. She called me angry, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel. She said I was tearing apart the family over money, that I was choosing material possessions over blood relationships. She claimed they'd intended to pay me back eventually, and that I was overreacting to what was essentially a temporary loan. I reminded her that loans require the borrower's consent and knowledge. What they'd done was theft, plain and simple. I told her that if she'd needed money, she could have asked honestly instead of creating an elaborate lie about our mother dying. I said that real emergencies don't require deception. Update 1. The legal proceedings took 6 months to resolve. During that time, I learned even more disturbing details about the extent of their fraud. The prosecutor's office discovered that Mom had been running similar scams in 2 other states before moving to our area. She'd built a church congregation out of nearly $20,000 with a story about needing money for her grandson's medical treatment. She'd convinced a former employer to give her an advance on her pension by claiming she needed emergency surgery. My sister had been her partner in most of these schemes, often playing the role of the concerned daughter or the desperate mother, depending on what the situation required. They developed a sophisticated system for identifying potential victims, researching their backgrounds, and crafting personalized stories designed to trigger maximum emotional and financial response. The private investigator found evidence that they'd been planning to expand their operation. They discussed targeting online crowdfunding platforms, creating fake medical fundraisers with stolen photos and fabricated stories. They'd researched which types of medical conditions generated the most sympathy and donations. During the trial, I testified about my experience. I described the phone call, the emotional manipulation, and the devastating betrayal I'd felt when I discovered the truth. The prosecutor asked me to explain how the fraud had affected me beyond the financial loss. I told the court that they'd stolen more than my money. They'd stolen my ability to trust family members, my willingness to help others in genuine emergencies, and my faith in the fundamental decency of people I'd loved my entire life. I explained that every future request for help would now be filtered through suspicion and doubt, that their actions had poisoned my relationships with other family members who might genuinely need assistance someday. Mom's defense attorney tried to portray her as a confused elderly woman who'd made poor decisions under stress. But the evidence of systematic, long-term fraud was overwhelming. The judge noted that this wasn't a case of momentary weakness or desperation, but rather a calculated pattern of criminal behavior that had victimized multiple people over several years. Both Mom and my sister were convicted on all charges. Mom received 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution to all identified victims. My sister received 2 years and was also required to make financial restitution. The court ordered the liquidation of Mom's hidden assets to help compensate the people she'd defrauded. I recovered about $18,000 of my original $28,000 loss. The rest had been spent on luxury items that had depreciated significantly or couldn't be recovered. While I was grateful to get anything back, the financial recovery felt almost secondary to the sense of justice being served. Update 2. The aftermath of the trial was complicated. Extended family members were divided in their reactions. Some supported my decision to pursue criminal charges, saying that fraud was fraud regardless of family relationships. Others felt I'd been too harsh, arguing that family disputes should be resolved privately rather than through the legal system. My uncle, who had been their next intended target, thanked me for stopping them before they could victimize him. He said he'd been suspicious when my sister contacted him about Mom's supposed need for radiation treatment money, especially since he'd heard nothing about any cancer diagnosis from other family members. Several of Mom's previous victims reached out to me after the trial. They shared their own stories of being manipulated and defrauded, expressing gratitude that someone had finally held her accountable. One elderly woman from Mom's former church told me she'd given up her vacation savings to help with what she thought was a medical emergency, only to see Mom posting photos of expensive purchases on social media weeks later. These conversations helped me understand that my decision to involve authorities had protected other potential victims. If I'd handled this privately, Mom and my sister would likely have continued their criminal activities, targeting new victims and refining their techniques. My relationship with other family members required careful navigation. Some cousins and aunts initially blamed me for the family drama, but as more details about the fraud emerged, most came to understand that I'd been a victim rather than a troublemaker. A few family members admitted they'd also been approached for money over the years, but had declined for various reasons. The experience changed my approach to family relationships fundamentally. I established clear boundaries about financial assistance, requiring documentation and verification for any future requests. I also became more observant of manipulation tactics and emotional pressure techniques that I'd previously accepted as normal family dynamics. Update 3. 2 years after the trial, I've rebuilt my savings account and purchased the house I'd originally been saving for. The experience taught me valuable lessons about financial security and the importance of maintaining emergency funds that can't be easily accessed through emotional manipulation. Mom was released from prison after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence. She attempted to contact me several times, initially through letters that alternated between apologies and accusations. She claimed she'd found religion in prison and wanted to make amends, but also suggested that my actions had been disproportionate to her crimes. I didn't respond to her letters or phone calls. The trust that had been broken couldn't be repaired with apologies, especially when those apologies came mixed with attempts to minimize her actions and shift blame. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require maintaining relationships with people who've proven themselves to be fundamentally dishonest. My sister completed her sentence and moved to another state. She sent me a single text message saying she was sorry and hoped we could rebuild our relationship someday. I appreciated the apology but realized that some bridges, once burned, can't be reconstructed. The person I'd thought was my sister had never really existed. She'd been a character in an elaborate performance designed to exploit my emotions and resources. The experience ultimately made me stronger and more discerning. I developed better instincts for recognizing manipulation and emotional pressure tactics. I learned to separate genuine emergencies from manufactured crises and to distinguish between people who needed help and people who specialized in appearing to need help. I also discovered that justice, while sometimes painful to pursue, was essential for healing. By holding Mom and my sister accountable for their actions, I not only protected future victims, but also reclaimed my own sense of agency and self-respect. I'd refused to be a victim and had instead become someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The money I'd lost was eventually recovered through restitution payments, but the lessons I'd learned were far more valuable than any financial compensation. I discovered that family relationships built on lies and manipulation aren't worth preserving, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to hold people accountable for their actions, even when those people are family members. Today, I'm more cautious but not cynical, more discerning but not suspicious. I still help people in genuine need, but I verify their situations first. I still value family relationships, but I understand that blood relations don't excuse criminal behavior or justify ongoing victimization. The experience taught me that real love sometimes requires difficult decisions, that protecting yourself and others from predators is more important than maintaining comfortable illusions, and that justice, while painful, is often the only path to genuine healing and closure.